Hey everyone, Dave here, and today I want to do another deck tech for one of my EDH decks. The commander for this deck is Sygg River Cutthroat, and Sygg is actually being reprinted in one of the new Zendikar Rising commander decks that's about to come out. He's, I guess, kind of the secondary commander in one of those decks. It's the blue-black rogue tribal deck. So what Sygg does is he is a 2-mana 1/3. Costs 2 of either a hybrid blue or black. He's a Merfolk Rogue, and it says, at end of turn, if an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, you may draw a card. So, I actually discovered Sygg quite a while ago when I first started playing Magic, and I was just starting to get into Modern. I was playing this red-black burn deck, and there were a lot of cards that I just didn't know about, so I actually looked through every red or black creature in Modern that cost 3 or less mana, just to find something that might be cool for playing in a burn deck, and Sygg stood out to me because I thought potentially he could work well because it's a 2-drop, so you can play it early, and the idea was that I could go something like Lava Spike on my turn, end step, draw a card from Sygg, then on the opponent's turn, Lightning Bolt them, their end step, draw a card from Sygg, then on my draw step, I draw a card, so for every turn cycle, I would be drawing 3 cards. However, that just never really worked out the way I wanted it to, and it just didn't quite fit in that deck. But I still thought this card was cool, so maybe like 1 or 2 years ago, I decided to make him into a commander. So, the way he works in the new Zendikar Rising deck is going in on the Rogue Tribal, and that's one way I've seen this deck built. However, the way I've made it is just to ignore this completely and just go as kind of a blue-black good stuff deck. I feel like you don't really need to try to make this ability work, because especially in a 4-player game, the opponents are just going to lose life as the game naturally progresses. So I feel like with Sygg, you can just kind of play this on turn 2 and let the game play out, and your opponents are going to lose life as they attack each other and pay costs and stuff. And as Sygg sits there kind of doing nothing, it's just going to incidentally draw you cards. So there are also maybe, I would say, 3 kind of little sub-themes in this deck, and I'll get to those as we get going. So Sygg can go up here. So first with the creatures, this is the first sub-theme, and it's kind of similar to a ninja's deck in that I have quite a few 1 mana or 1 or 2 mana cheap evasive creatures, because with Sygg you want your opponents to be losing life, so one way to ensure they'll lose life is to be able to attack and go unblocked. So I have several creatures like this Siren Storm Tamer. It's a 1/1 flyer for 1. And I can play this early and start getting in damage and put some equipment on it so that it will be doing 3 damage and triggering Sygg. However, with these creatures, all of them also have some kind of other ability that makes them better than being just a 1/1 flyer. Siren Storm Tamer, it says I can pay blue, sacrifice it, and counter a spell or ability that targets a creature or me, a creature I control or me. So this card is pretty sweet. It was really popular in Standard while it was in Standard, because it's kind of like an onboard removal spell attached to an evasive creature. I've got another thing like this in Mausoleum Wanderer. It's very similar to Siren Storm Tamer in that it's an onboard removal spell. I can sacrifice it to counter an instant or sorcery unless its controller plays X, where X is Mausoleum Wanderer's power. And this also gets bigger whenever I play Spirits, but I'm not sure if there are any other spirits in this deck, so X is probably always going to be 1 when I use this ability, but honestly that's still pretty good. Another of these flyers, Hypnotic Siren. I like this one a lot, and this goes into another one of the sub-themes in this deck, which is the idea of taking control of your opponent's permanents. So that's what this can do. On turn 1 it can be a 1/1 flyer if I want, but also it has this bestow ability. I can pay 7, and this would come into play as an aura attached to a creature, and it says I control enchanted creature, and the enchanted creature gets +1/+1 in flying. So if this is the late game or I've ramped up to 7, I could use this to steal an opponent's creature. Spectral Sailor for another flyer. This one is currently in Standard. This one's pretty sweet though. It's got Flash, and also I can pay 4 mana, 3 and a blue to draw a card. I've got Gilded Drake. This card is pretty much like a 2 mana control magic also. 2 mana control magic. So it's a 3/3 flyer for 2. But when it comes into play, I exchange control of this for a creature one of my opponents controls, or I sacrifice this. But that's a pretty sweet deal because I could take whatever I want and my opponent has a 3/3 flyer that does nothing. Invisible Stalker. This card is pretty sweet. 1/1 hexproof, unblockable. So I have a few equipments and enchantments in this deck that I could put on this guy, and it's super annoying for the opponents, I imagine, because there isn't really much they can do about it outside of playing some kind of board wipe or making me sacrifice a creature. Thada Adele. This card is another one that can let me play opponent's permanents. The thing that I like about the theme of playing opponent's permanents actually is that I feel like it makes this deck really replayable, because pretty much every game that I play is going to be unique, because it changes for every opponent that I have. I think it just makes it a lot more fun, because with some decks they can kind of get a little bit boring, I guess, because you're doing the same thing every game, but with this, every game is different. So anyway, Thada Adele, she's a 2/2 merfolk for 3 mana with Island Walk, and whenever she does combat damage to a player, I can look through their library for an artifact and exile it, and then until the end of the turn I can play that card. Pretty cool. I mean, I can grab like something as simple as a Soul Ring, or any artifact really. True Name Nemesis is the same idea as Invisible Stalker, just a bigger version of it pretty much, and an even harder to deal with version of it. And just get in for damage guaranteed with this guy. It has protection from a player. Loyal Subordinate almost feels like it was made for this deck. A 3/1 for 3 mana. It has Menace, and it has the Lieutenant ability, so it says, at the beginning of combat on my turn, if I control my commander, each opponent loses 3 life. Well, Sygg just so happens to trigger if an opponent lost 3 life. So that means that this guarantees that at the end of each of my turns, Sygg is going to trigger and I'll get to draw a card. I've got a Thassa in here. It serves a few purposes. I mean, it's an indestructible enchantment that could become a creature. It can make my creatures unblockable, but also, if none of that happens, even if it's just sitting in play letting me scry for every upkeep, that's still pretty useful. I've got both Thief of Sanity and Nightveil Spectre. They're very similar creatures. Both of them are 3 mana flyers that allow me to exile cards from the top of my opponent's library when I deal damage to them, and then I can play those cards. So these ones, they're like the evasive creatures and also things that let me play my opponent's cards. There is a small ninja theme to this deck. If you wanted to play the most competitive version of this deck, you would just make it a Yuriko deck and play more ninjas. But I've only got a few ninjas in here, and I have Yuriko because she is a pretty great card. She works well enough just triggering off of herself. Like, I kind of have her in here not to maximize the amount of triggers I can get from other ninjas doing damage, but just for when she herself deals damage, and her triggers just once. I mean, that's good enough for me if I can just do that each turn by making her unblockable or something. Notion Thief, pretty cool sort of hate card, I guess. 3/1 for flash with 4, and if an opponent would draw a card except for the first one they draw each turn, they skip that draw and I draw instead. Feels so good getting people with this. When they try to go off and draw a ton of cards, you just say nope, I get to draw them instead. Got a Glenalendra Archmage. This is another onboard removal spell on a flyer. So I can pay a blue and sack this to counter a non-creature spell, but it has persist, so it'll come back and let me do that a second time. Twilight Prophet is a pretty new addition. This is just kind of as a good stuff card. It has the Ascend ability, so I get the City's Blessing if I have 10 or more permanents. But at the beginning of my upkeep, if I have the City's Blessing, which is quite easy to do, I reveal the top card of my library and put it into my hand, and then I drain my opponent. Well, it says each opponent loses X life and I gain X life, where X is the card's converted mana cost. So it's just in here as a form of a card advantage. I can gain some life off of it and do some incidental damage to the opponents. And I mean, if the damage done off of this is 3 or more, then that's going to trigger Sygg. The Scarab God, I put this in here after I got one in one of my double masters boxes, but this is a pretty great blue-black good stuff card. I'm not too worried about going in on zombie synergy with this. It's just here, just kind of by itself. I can just keep using its ability to take my opponent's cards out of the graveyard or rebuy something out of my graveyard, have it come back as a 4/4 zombie, and kind of incidentally drain some life. Consecrated Sphinx. So this is getting into, I guess, what I would consider the big fatties versions, like the big fatties, I don't know, classification of the creatures in this deck. So we got the Scarab God, got a Consecrated Sphinx, pretty awesome card, 4/6 flyer for 6, and whenever an opponent draws a card, I can draw 2 cards. So with this, it's kind of a card that whenever you play it, your opponents sigh and frantically look through their hand to see if they have removal, because if they can't remove this, it's gonna spiral out of control pretty quickly. You're gonna draw so many cards off of it. Got an Ink Eyes. This is another one of the ninjas. I like this one because it's another thing that lets me play my opponent's cards. When it does damage to a player, combat damage to a player, I can put a creature from their graveyard into play under my control. I can also pay 2 to regenerate it. Silent Blade Oni. This is, I guess, the biggest creature in this deck, but I think it's also potentially the most powerful. It's another ninja. Costs 7 mana, so it's a lot. The ninjutsu is only 6 though. And when it does combat damage to a player, I can look at the player's hand and cast any non-land card in it without paying its mana cost. So if your opponent has something good in their hand, you can surprise them with this and just ruin their day. So since this is a blue-black deck, so this is all the creatures. Going on to the artifacts now, since it's a blue-black deck, I need to rely on artifacts for ramp. So I have quite a few of those because I feel like ramping is really important in EDH. So I want to maximize the chances of having one of these on turn 1 or 2. So I've got both Mox Diamond and Chrome Mox, also Mox Amber. Like I was saying in the Ayula deck tech, I feel like Mox Amber works well in any commander deck that has a commander whose CMC is 3 or less, so it's perfect for Sygg, who is only 2. Also have Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, Soul Ring, and Dimir Signet. This could probably be a, what is it, Arcane Signet, I think is the name of the new card from the Brawl decks. But got all of this artifact ramp. I feel like it's pretty important. A few more artifacts. Sensei's Divining Top. Good card that lets me manipulate the top of my deck. Can smooth out a lot of bad draws. Sword of the Animist. So this is getting into the equipments. I have a few of them in here because I want to put them on my guys that are either hard to block or hard to kill. Sword of the Animist is awesome. It feels great to go Invisible Stalker turn 2 and then have it equipped attacking with this on the next turn and just get a free rampant growth every turn. Pretty great. I have 3 of the swords in here. I have Light and Shadow, Feast and Famine, and Fire and Ice. All of them are pretty good. Great to put on an unblockable thing, or even just Sygg, to be honest. Give him protection from some colors and start attacking. I have a Dowsing Dagger. So this is an equipment, and it's also ramp, because if I put this on a thing that's hard to block, chances are I'm going to trigger its ability that says when equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, I can transform this, which transforms into a land that taps for 3 mana of any color. Pretty great for ramping. I have a Lightning Greaves. I have just Lightning Greaves and not Swiftfoot Boots also, because I feel like none of the creatures in here are particular lightning rods in regards to needing to be removed, but at the same time, Lightning Greaves is just such a good card that I feel like I should be playing this, and maybe I end up taking one of my opponent's creatures that does need to be removed. I can put Lightning Greaves on it to give it Shroud. I have Oblivion Stone because, like I was saying with the Ayula deck, I just like having a catch-all answer to pretty much everything. And being in blue and black, I don't have any actual artifact or enchantment removal. Like, I could bounce it with a blue card, but outside of that, there's not much I can do about artifacts and enchantments. So Oblivion Stone lets me deal with those. I have quite a few counterspells in here. So Undermine is pretty great for Sygg because it counters a spell and also their player loses 3 life, so that would make Sygg trigger. Counter Squall is very similar. Unfortunately, they only lose 2 life, so they would need to take 1 more damage to trigger Sygg, but still a good card. Disallow, counter spell that can counter any spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Cryptic Command, very classic counter spell, very flexible. I could use this to maybe, if I need to bounce artifact or enchantment, I could do that. Similar kind of idea with Mystic Confluence. It can be a counter spell, or I can draw cards or bounce some cards back to the opponent's hand. Got a Force of Will, just another free counter spell, pretty great. Actual straight up counter spell. Pact of Negation, another free counter spell. So you see I got quite a few counter spells in here. Desertion is another counter spell, however, it says counter target spell. If an artifact or creature spell is countered this way, put that card onto the battlefield under your control instead of into its owner's graveyard. So not only is it counter spell, it also lets me take control of an opponent's card. So that's all the counter spells. I have a few extra turn cards in here. I don't want to be playing too many of them because while I want this to be a powerful deck, I also want it to be fun for both me and my opponent, and it can kind of sort of ruin a game, I guess, if you take too many extra turns. So I'm okay with taking a few extra turns, but I don't want to be just doing it all the time. So I have a Karn's Temporal Sundering, a Temporal Trespass, and an Expropriate. So I got 3 of them in here. This is one of my favorite cards in this deck, actually, Stolen Identity. I think it's probably, I don't think it's that popular of a card. It's from Gatecrash. 6 mana sorcery. It says, put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of an artifact or creature. Then it has this Cipher ability, so then I can exile this spell and put it encoded onto a creature I control, and whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, I get to copy this spell. So what I've had happen before is my Invisible Stalker gets Stolen Identity encoded onto it, and this guy's going to get in for damage every turn. There's not much the opponent can do about it. So every turn I get to cast a free Stolen Identity. It feels pretty great. Got a bit of removal in here. Toxic Deluge. It's a great removal spell. Hero's Downfall. Destroy any target creature or planeswalker. Cyclonic Rift is one of the best commander cards. Pretty awesome removal. It's not permanent removal, but it's still good, to put it lightly. Got a Treachery. I consider this removal. It's just I control enchanted creature, and when it comes into play, untap up to 5 lands. It costs 5, so that makes it kind of free. Got a few enchantments in here. I've got a Search for Azcanta, just as a kind of good stuff utility card. So if you don't know what it does, at the beginning of my upkeep, I can look at the top card of my library and choose to put it into my graveyard or not. And if I have 7 more cards in my graveyard, I can transform this. It transforms into a land, so that in itself is a ramp because it gives me an extra land. But also, with this I can pay 3 and tap this to look at the top 4 cards in my library and then choose a non-creature or non-land from it, reveal it, and put it into my hand. I could be playing this deck as a control deck because I do have a lot of counter spells, a bit of removal. I could just sit back on those and use this every turn to be drawing more stuff. Got a Phyrexian Arena for some card draw. Revel in Riches is another one of my favorite cards. I tried to make this work in Standard and Historic, but just didn't work. But in Commander, I think it's pretty awesome. This is another card where you don't really need to do anything to make it good. It's just good on its own, and it will be useful as the game just naturally progresses. It's a 5 mana enchantment that says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, I create a treasure. And then at the beginning of my upkeep, if I control 10 or more treasures, I win the game. So this is an alternate win condition. Also a good ramp card. There are lots of creatures, an opponent plays a Wrath, and this is in play. Gonna get a ton of treasures. I just like this card a lot. Leyline of Anticipation allows me to play all of my spells at instant speed. Pretty powerful. I've got this Bloodchief Ascension. It's a pretty cool 1-mana enchantment. It works really well with Sygg actually, because it says at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you can put a quest counter on this, and then whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you can have that player lose 2 life and you gain 2 life. So this is kind of another card where you just put it in play and let the game play out. You don't have to do anything to make this work, because opponents are going to have many turns where they lose at least 2 life, and then this only needs 3 or more counters on it, and you can start draining your opponent for 2 pretty quickly. I think this card works really well with Sygg. Got a bit of card draw here. Treasure Cruise. Great card, basically Ancestral Recall. Got a Dig Through Time. Come on, focus. A couple of Tutors. Got both Vampiric and Demonic Tutor. Just to look through my deck and find whatever card I might need. And now it's on to the lands. A whole bunch of duels here. I've got some fetches and Polluted Delta, Flooded Strand, Bloodstained Mire, and Marsh Flats. An actual duel here. Got the Underground Sea, Command Tower, Underground River, Watery Grave, Choked Estuary, Fetid Pools, River of Tears, Creeping Tar Pit, Darkslick Shores, Sunken Hollow. I think out of all of the duels that I have, probably these 2 are the worst, but they are still duels. This one can come onto play untapped. This one always comes into play tapped, but at least I get a scry off of it. A Morphic Pool, a Battlebond land, Sunken Ruins, and now some utility lands. I have a Strip Mine to destroy any kind of problematic lands my opponent might have. Ghost Quarter does the same kind of thing. Although with Ghost Quarter I could potentially use it to fix my own mana if I really need to. Maze of Ith. It's a land, but you use it as a spell because it doesn't tap for mana. You can use this to prevent an opponent's creature from attacking. Got an Urborg to make everything into swamps. Phyrexian Tower can be a little bit of ramp. Shizo. This card, it's not particularly synergistic with anything in my deck, but at the same time, it's a land that comes into play untapped, that taps for black, and kind of has no drawback really. Like, it's legendary, but whatever, that's fine. So it's kind of in here because it's basically a swamp with a marginal upside. Giving something fear could be relevant at some point. Bojuka Bog, exiling graveyards. Rogue's Passage. Another thing, it's not super synergistic. It's definitely useful, but if nothing else, it's definitely on theme with Rogues and Sygg, and then some basic lands. These are also kind of mismatched. That's okay though. Maybe at some point I'll get all matching lands, I don't know. I don't know which ones I would even want. A couple of snow covers here. I particularly like the unstable basic lands, so if I were to get all matching ones, I might go with those. I don't think I would get foil ones, though. That's too expensive. But yeah, that's my Sygg deck. This is, I think I would consider, out of my EDH decks, I think I have 2 main ones, and this is one of the main ones. So I've got it pretty much fully powered up here. Like, I don't think I really skimped out on anything. I've put all of the powerful artifacts and the dual lands and everything in it, and I think this deck is a lot of fun. Like I was saying, I don't really take advantage of the rogue aspect of Sygg, but I think this is good as just like a blue-black good stuff deck where my commander can come out early and start drawing me cards just incidentally as the game plays itself out. And I think there's a lot of different ways this deck can be played. So if maybe you play Sygg or a similar deck and you think there's some cards that I'm not playing that I should be playing, I'd be happy to hear what you have to say. If you have any other kind of comments or critiques, it'd be cool to hear that too. And if you like videos like this, it'd be cool if you could like and subscribe and all that. And thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.